Good morning on this Sunday, December 29th, and welcome to this special edition of the Georgia Gang, where we take a look back at the best political stories of 2024 and look ahead to 2025. Topping the list, Georgia maintains its ranking as one of the most competitive battleground states in the country. Also, the twists and turns in the Fulton County election interference case, and what will be the impact of the Appalachia High School shooting on the 2025 legislative session. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Brian are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Let's get right to the top political stories that shaped 2024 here in the Peach State. All eyes were on Georgia in this year's presidential race, and for several reasons. Brian, I almost forgot because June seemed so long ago. The debate that threw the presidential race into chaos on the Democratic side happened right here in Atlanta.
Absolutely, and Theron and I had the chance that day to do some cable news hits there in the McCamish Pavilion Auditorium. So it was something that was very meaningful for us. I was able to I had to take my daughter because my wife was out of town that week. But my daughter is there and like getting pictures with all these like cable news celebrities.
Thank you for being a good parent.
Yeah, yeah, she doesn't like it when I say babysitting. No, yeah. Brian, you're parenting is what
Exactly.
You're doing. So we were able to have her there for this really historic day. And little did we know at that moment that the world was about to change dramatically, and it happened here. And Georgia is the right place for those sort of big political moments to happen. We had the fourth smallest margin in the general election. So it made sense that the debate was here because Georgians are the deciders. We are very important super voters in the American process. And I think they should come back again in 4 years because Georgia's going to be where it's at again because the numbers are going to remain really tight. We're going to see what happens here in 2026. Will Republicans be able to maintain the same margins that they had in 2022 and in 2024 with Trump in the White House when there's always this backlash to the incumbent party? So a lot of fun things happening here.
Well, Theron, there were a lot of high hopes for Kamala Harris when she became the presidential nominee.
Well, to Brian's point and your point, pointing out the debate, let's fast forward to July 21st, that Sunday morning. We all wake up to the news that President Joe Biden has decided to exit the race and endorse Kamala Harris. That changed politics forever in this country because it was only 107 days that Vice President Kamala Harris had to go and run against a person, President Trump. President-elect Trump, who actually had been running for 4 years. But at the same time, though, you can't discount the amount of energy that she created with her candidacy. I mean, you saw women, men, gay, straight, Asian, Hispanic voters get very, very excited about her candidacy. And I think that she will go down in history as really honestly playing an integral part in rebuilding the Democratic Party. Unfortunately, we did not win the election. But the other thing is to kind of focus on Georgia. I mean, we are a battleground state. I mean, it showed you that 2020 was not a fluke. Let's not forget, we also had very close U.S. Senate races. And so as we fast forward to 26, Lori, I think that we are going to get a lot of national attention with our gubernatorial elections. And then in 28, no matter who the nominees are, Georgia will again have a lot of attention. And then the other thing I want to say as a Democrat, I do want to compliment Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his staff for doing what we needed to do, and that is have an election that was run correctly. Yes, it has some challenges, but ultimately it was not like what we saw in 2020.
Well, Phil, when a race is this close in Georgia, we always look to the independent voters who decide the winner. This time, unlike 2020, they leaned right.
Well, that's right. And I think that the Republicans can be optimistic in this state because as you look back, it maintained excellent majorities in both the state house and the state senate. Yes, Trump won convincingly here in the state. And so it's going to be interesting to see. I think Republicans have a good shot at knocking off Democrat Senator John Ossoff when it comes to 2026 rolls around. But you're right, the center is very important to both parties. You have to convince the center to come over to your side to win. I think the Republicans have a great chance because, as I said a couple of weeks ago, Theron, your party has to go more to the center because there's too much of this radical garbage that's gone on, transgender propaganda, weak on national defense. I could go on, inflation. And so as long as people are happy, and I think, Brian, to your point, I think there's going to be energy reliability. There's going to be inflation under control. I think we're going to have a stronger national defense and a stronger leader. So I think usually, yes, the ruling party does lose in an off term. I don't know if that's the case.
I would agree with you one last time in 2024. Yes, Democrats have to be more in the center. We definitely got to actually be more appealing to moderate independent voters.
So before I get to Melita, then let me ask you, because 2028, a lot of folks are already talking about Kamala Harris being, I know it's a long time away, but a lot of people are talking about her being the front runner. Do you see her returning?
What she did, yes, absolutely. She definitely deserves to be in the conversation. Now, will she run again in 2028? We'll have to see. But there's also a lot of talk about her possibly looking at California to in the governor's race. But again, I'm gonna, I can't believe I'm agreeing with Phil one last time in 2024. But we definitely have to be more moderate and be more appealing to working class voters.
Melita.
But what we also have to think about is the fact that as the legislature convenes in January, there will be, we think, 80 Democratic legislators. That's the largest number of Democratic caucus House members in 2 decades. So we also are experiencing still a lot of growth in Georgia, and that growth tends to be more diverse and younger. So that will be good for Democrats. And the 2026 jockeying, when you have a term-limited governor, you have lots of people who envision themselves as governor, and that creates all kinds of vacancies and openings. So we're going to have a very robust 2 years as people jockey for what they plan to run for in 2026. And I do think that Senator Ossoff will put up quite a fight to keep his seat. He's already started that process. I think I got 6 press releases from his staff this week. So it's going to be a very
66.
robust 6.
66. I get them too. It was nonstop. It was like 6 at a time. Yes.
Anyway, so we're going to be a very robust battleground state for the next 4 years, and it's going to be very interesting to watch and see how both parties position themselves, because some of the policies being proposed by the Trump administration straight out of the gate are not popular with the general population. They're not even popular with some of the Republicans who backed his reelection bid. So we're going to have a robust discussion.
Well, a lot of issues, did not bode well for Democrats this year, including the economy and illegal immigration. The killing of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley by an illegal immigrant, Jose Ibarra, really brought the issue front and center, not only here in Georgia, but across the country, Brian.
This was the number 2 issue on voters' minds across the country, and what we have seen in the data since the election is Americans weren't imagining it. This has been the highest influx of immigrants, legal and illegal, in American history over the last few years, and 60+% of those are here illegally. So people weren't just acting crazy, it was impacting their community. You can't bring in this many millions of people without it having some impact on the way neighborhoods look, on public services, on public safety. All of these things are brought to bear, and we saw it in the Laken Riley case. It embodied the issue that so many Americans are angry about. The Georgia General Assembly was able to pass legislation that makes local law enforcement hold criminal illegal immigrants until ICE and the feds can get them and do the deportation or the other criminal justice hearings if they need to be jailed and imprisoned here in the United States. Americans want to see change. I think this is one of the biggest opportunities and challenges for President Trump, because it's going to be really hard to fix. This is not a magic wand issue, but President Trump can get off on the right foot by fulfilling his promises, because Americans are tired of it.
Theron, is this, when we were talking about, Democrats maybe being more to the middle, is this an issue where there's room to move?
Look, we need a bipartisan, long-term systemic issue to deal with the crisis at the border. We had a proposal that President Biden put forth. It was not supported by the Republicans because President Trump told the Republican leadership not to support it. So now that he will be the next president, I think that Democrats and Republicans are going to have to come together and build on some of the things that we did. And then it's also this messaging around it, right? The Republicans did a good job of saying, hey, we're stronger on the border crisis than Democrats. But the truth of the matter is, Lori, is that if you look at the last few months, the Biden-Harris administration has been tougher on the borders. And so, the campaign is over now. I think you'll have some bipartisan solutions to put forward.
Phil?
The Biden-Harris folks have not been good at all, and I can't believe I'm still stunned you would say that.
The numbers don't lie. The numbers,
listen,
border crosses are down. They're not true. Like,
we don't know who's coming through, number one. Number two, the Biden administration, even as we're taping, they are selling off the wall that we should have built. It's an outrage. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. And as for that bill that the Republicans didn't like, even Senator Jim Langford, the author of that bill, disowned it at the end because it allowed for an amnesty for illegal immigrants, and it allowed for all of this. It wasn't really a border bill. It was more of a Christmas tree full of green energy garbage. But anyhow, I'm glad that immigration was focused on by Donald Trump. I remember in 2015, it was the first speech I'd ever heard as a Republican where a candidate said, you know what, Mexico is screwing us over. We've got to secure the border. We've got to have a wall. And that's how the popularity started. And yes, as the years went by, we saw gangs, we saw fentanyl coming into this country. If nothing else, it's a national scandal that this drug is killing more Americans than terrorists are killing.
But the scandal is the way Republicans have lied about how fentanyl gets into this country, because it's not illegal immigrants who are bringing it over, the people struggling for a better life. It's more likely U.S. citizens who are acting as mules.
It's the illegals.
Check the numbers, the real numbers, not the Republican rhetoric.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Up next, another tragedy hits Georgia, a mass shooting at Appalachia High School. We'll discuss the political impacts next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Remembering the victims of the Appalachia High School shooting. 2 students and 2 teachers were killed back in September. Another 9 people injured after police say 14-year-old Colt Gray opened fire. Police also charged his father in the shooting. They say he knowingly allowed his son to possess a weapon. Theron, we saw House Speaker John Burns, the first out of the gate to make school safety a top priority. What are you expecting for the legislative session?
So, Lori, you always challenge us, and I did not do as good as I should have done, is actually getting you some topics that we were very passionate about this year. Now, while, I did agree with my colleagues' suggestions, but you know that this has been at the top of my list. And when I think about 2024 and which topic I got the most passionate about, this is at the top of the list. And just to, let our viewers know what happened at Appalachia High School could have been avoided. There were so many warning signs that many people, whether it's multi-jurisdictional failures, but that should have never happened. And I still sympathize with the families and the people in that Wanda-Barrett community, and they are still grieving these senseless murders that happen. And so I think that, look, while House Speaker Burns should be applauded, there's still not enough Republicans and Democrats who are talking about this. So I predict that these legislators and this new group of freshman class, I think, Melita, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's 20 of them roughly. This is something that is top priority for them, and we have new leadership on both sides. And so somebody's going to step up and do something about responsible gun ownership while dealing with mental illness, but also making sure that the federal, state, and local authorities are coordinating to make sure that what happened at Appalachia High School doesn't happen again.
Brian, what are we going to see on the Republican side?
Well, I was glad you mentioned Speaker Burns, because he's been the most vocal and the most visionary when it comes to finding a solution to what is the American cancer. It is something that should concern all of us in this country and should terrify us as parents. It's something that I have had trouble even talking about, because whenever this issue comes up, we're talking about my baby. We're talking about my 8-year-old every single time. And so it's just so personal to each of us who are parents and grandparents like Melita and Phil. So I want to see some solutions here. I appreciate Speaker Burns coming forward with some ideas that make sure that school districts communicate with each other when troubled children who have made threats in the past or have had troubling signs, when they move to another school, because they do get moved around because nobody wants them, right? Those schools need to tell each other, hey, this guy's got some mental health issues, or they've said some concerning things, etc., and make sure local law enforcement is aware of that as well. We did see some recent reforms make a difference. We had an alarm system that got law enforcement there quickly. That's something we put in the budget in the last couple of years. The teachers had something on their arm, and there was some school hardening that was done there that made sure that he was neutralized fairly quickly. There's more to be done. Speaker Burns cannot be the only voice talking about this on the Republican side. We need to see more people coming forward to say, this is a crisis. This is something we want to see fixed.
On to another huge story that is still playing out in Georgia, the 2020 Fulton County election interference case against now President-elect Trump and several of his allies. Phil, the Georgia Court of Appeals ruled District Attorney Fani Willis cannot prosecute the case after her romantic relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade was revealed. She, of course, is appealing that decision to the Georgia Supreme Court.
Well, that was a big defeat for DA Fani Willis in Fulton County. The Court of Appeals rightly said that this was a horrible, inappropriate relationship that she had with her lover, who was the prosecutor, who wasn't that great a prosecutor. He had to get experience in the RICO statute that she was using against Trump. But the fact is, this is died on the vine, and it's a victory for President Trump. There never should have been any prosecutor targeting someone like Donald Trump. Yes, you're a prosecutor, but as a DA, you're also supposed to be fostering justice and fairness. That was not done. The fact that Fani Willis and Nathan Wade had conflicting stories and lies, that was just as bad as the inappropriate relationship.
Melita, the Court of Appeals did not dismiss the case, so now it's up to the prosecuting attorney's counsel.
Well, actually, the case goes before the state Supreme Court on appeal. And then we will see if the prosecuting attorney's counsel chooses to act. But the prosecuting attorney's counsel slow-walked a decision about Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and his potential indictment. But the other thing we have to realize is that there were 14 others who were indicted at the same time as the current and future president. So what happens to those cases? And then the other thing is that if these cases all disappear, then the theft of that critical election software from Coffee County goes completely unpunished. No one is held accountable and nothing happens. Is that really what we want?
All right, we'll leave it there. Up next, will elected officials finally look at major improvements within the Georgia prison system and also at the Fulton County Jail?
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Another political story that will play out under the Gold Dome in 2025, the way Georgia treats its prison population. This past year, we've also focused so much on the conditions at the Fulton County Jail. Phil?
Well, it's a disgrace what's happened in the whole state correction system, number one, and we've talked about the Fulton County Jail ad nauseum here on this program, and it definitely needs at least some patchwork and upgrades. That's probably going to be the reform in 2025. But as we look into the crystal ball for 2025, I have lost confidence in Commissioner Oliver with the Corrections Department. They've locked down. They're not being transparent. They don't have a plan as to how we do everything better in these prisons, where the murder rate is up in prisons, where I gave the example recently, I'll give it again to viewers because it shocked a lot of viewers when they heard me say it. A warden was actually arrested and convicted for running a criminal gang in his own prison. And it's got to stop. I think that the legislature, I think we all agree, should make this a priority when it comes to funding. These are some of the lowest paid state employees. It used to be a plum to be in the correction system 25 years ago. Not anymore. So we have to upgrade that. We've got to stop the use of cell phones. I know Attorney General Chris Carr is working on that. We can't have drones dropping in supplies to the gangs. And I've always said this, the biggest recruiter of the rising criminal gangs are the prisons.
Theron?
The word that Phil just mentioned is so important. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Lori, is that the lack of transparency. That it's got to be a transparent process of how we move forward dealing with our prison systems in Georgia. And I can't tell you the amount of families and friends that called me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, I too have a son, I have a nephew, I have a cousin, I have a sister who now is either in prison or has come out, and they talk about the deplorable conditions. But to the Fulton County Jail, look, I truly believe that Sheriff Patrick LaBai is doing everything he can to try to move a political conversation forward, but with some guardrails on the budget, and we need to build a new jail. Now, how we get that done, there is a plan in place to sort of put some redevelopment sort of process on the jail and to try to get it in better condition. But ultimately, this is going to be something that I think the legislature is going to talk about, and not just focusing on jails, but also giving these sheriff's departments across the state of Georgia the resources they need, because they here are some of them are the biggest mental illness holders of people who are mentally ill, and giving them the mental health care that they deserve.
All right, moving on. There are still growing calls to shut down the Biolab plant in Conyers after a fire sent chemicals into the air, forcing the evacuations of thousands. Melita, gosh, we remember these pictures. This was quite a scene for several days.
It was, and what you have there are some dangerous chemicals that don't interact well with water. So when you're trying to put out a fire, that creates this chlorine cloud that could be seen for 30 miles. And since Conyers was so near the city of Atlanta, that was one of the things all of the meteorologists in town were tracking, was the wind direction. Was that chlorine cloud coming towards the city or away from it? And this is a prime example of an industry, a location for a company that had had continued problems with safety. They'd had three other incidents in past years. They'd settled a lawsuit out of court and paid out multi-million-dollar payouts. So when a company has proven they are incapable of properly operating their facility, do you continue to let them operate? And our Environmental Protection Division needs to take its responsibility for meting out punishment more seriously.
All right, I want to get to one more issue before we have to wrap this block. Despite all the controversies and protests, Atlanta moved forward and built its public safety training facility. Brian, this was about leadership from the mayor to the police and fire chiefs to city council.
To the governor and the General Assembly as well. Republicans stood up and made sure this moved forward. This will be a legacy issue for Mayor Dickens. I know he's going to be running for re-election next year, so he'll have a second term, but this still will be one of the things that you look back on and say, this was a time of challenge, this was a time of decision. He had backbone, he stood his ground. He even stood down and faced down parts of his own base in the liberal Democratic coalitions. It was his own voters who were against this, so it was courageous in addition to being the right thing to do. This is going to make our community safer. This is going to make the whole metro region a better place to live and raise a family. Thank you, Mayor Dickens, but also thank you to all the city council members who did the courageous thing. It's easier for the Republicans on the state level to be for it because there's no opposition with their base. The city officials earned their pay with what they did there.
Theron, those city officials had to dodge ping pong balls at the latest protest.
Well, Phil and I were here chuckling because, Brian, maybe you overheard us, but during preparation for this show, we talked about how Mayor Dickens has not gotten the praise that he deserves. So showing the steadfast leadership where there was many critics, including from his own party, his own council, and then shout out to those council members as well, ping pong balls and all thrown at them. But I have to be balanced here. We learned a lesson here in the city of Atlanta, and that's what we call the Atlanta way. There was probably a need for more public input in this process, but ultimately I think we move forward together with the state and the local folks working together. And look, these police officers, these emergency responders, these firefighters, they need that training. And I think what I would say, this little piece of advice for free, now be more transparent about what's going to actually be going on at the training facility. Let's see those nonviolent training seminars and exercises to try to de-escalate situations when they have to arrest people that doesn't necessarily lead to murder. I think the transparency now is going to be more important than ever going forward.
That's a great point. We'll leave it there. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Okay, Melita, we'll start with you.
Well, my winner is Mike Lukovich, because day after day, all year long, he has truly captured and expressed the ever-changing news and political cycle, and I think he deserves a Pulitzer next year.
AJC political cartoonist, we should mention.
Yes, and then I think the people who supported Pine Log Wildlife Management continuing to be a green space are big losers, because it's now headed towards being a quarry.
All right, Phil.
Well, I think the winners of this past year are the Republicans at the state level and the legislature, and also President-elect Donald Trump, soon to be president. And we talk about both parties have to build coalitions. Trump certainly did build a coalition with African Americans and with Latinos, record number of votes with rural voters, etc. And also the loser has to be the Democrats in Georgia and also President Joe Biden. The Wall Street Journal on December 20th, for example, big front page story. what a lot of us knew already was that here was a president in mental and physical decline, and yet, and this is a scandal, a lot of Democrats, not all, a lot of Democrats covered for him, said he was fine, sharp as a tack, could handle everything. That was a lie, and I think people realize it, and I think it turned a lot of people against what the Democrats and Harris were doing.
Theron.
I want to shout out Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. I mean, as we tape, Rudy Giuliani, who basically tried to ruin the lives of these two women, still has not turned over what he's been legally told to turn over.
Fulton County election workers.
Fulton County election workers. They know their name. I said their name on the show, but they're the winners. And the second winner is what Mayor Dickens, along with other many companies, is doing around affordable housing and dealing with the issue of homelessness in this. And then, like we like to call them, not homeless people, but unhoused citizens. I think he is to be commended for what he's doing there.
All right, Brian.
My loser's got to be Fani Willis if we're going to do the loser for the entire year. I mean, she's just had these two blockbuster cases that have just unraveled here at the end of 2024. Yes, she won re-election this year, but this is going to be a mark on her reputation into the future, perhaps forever. It's so high profile. This is what people are going to remember, and it hasn't ended well. Also, promised scholarships for low-income kids.
Happy New Year, everyone.